Hey, I'm Matt Manny. Thanks so much for joining me for today's devotional thought. We're on day 14. You're not alone when you've lost someone you love. We're in a brand new section of this study. And this part number 3, we're talking about devotional thoughts from Psalms, promises from Psalms that have to do with that you're not alone in your family struggle. Sometimes some of the most heartbreaking and some of the most difficult situations we can go through are when we have family struggles, things that we would be too embarrassed maybe to share with a friend or too embarrassed for people to know about because, well, we don't want to struggle. We find that sometimes those struggles happen when we find that those who we deeply love can also be the ones who deeply hurt us as well. Those that we have some of the most intimate interactions with, people that we have a shared experience and shared history with, our loved ones, can many times find that when we lose those relationships, when we've lost them to death or to separation or estrangement, it can really break our heart. But David knew what that was like. David grieved often throughout his lifetime. He especially grieved the death of 2 of his children. He had an infant son who he had with Bathsheba who passed away just after being born. He had a grown adult son by the name of Absalom who had been really like the apple of his father's eye. He was probably, of any son, he was most like David in his temperament and his impact and his winsome way of interacting with people as the king's son. And yet his son turned against David. He became an avowed enemy of David. And David's own advisors actually put out a hit on his son Absalom. And unfortunately, one of David's right-hand men took out Absalom to keep the political empire intact and to keep David's throne in place. And it's heartbreaking because even with that, David's grief was beyond comfort. With each passing death of his young son, newborn, and of Absalom, David processes grief by writing. Psalm 6, Psalm 9, 10, 27, 32, 33, 38, and 39. Psalm 51, 103, and 122 were all written in times of grief for David. Specifically, Psalm 9 is entitled, "For the choir director, a psalm of David to be sung to the tune, Death of the Son." As a pastor, I've had the privilege, but also the heartbreak of overseeing the funerals for all 4 of my grandparents. I've also had the opportunity to oversee the funeral for a small infant that had passed away in her father's arms. And to stand there in those moments, what do you say to a family who's grieving? It's one thing to grieve someone you love, but who's at the end of their days, like for my grandparents. It's another thing to grieve someone that's so unexpected, has their full life ahead of them. Listen to what David has to say for us for encouragement. He says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints." Psalm 116, verse 15. He says, "My health may fail, my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the strength of my heart. He is mine forever." Psalm 73, verse 26. Psalm 34, verse 18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed." In Psalm 16, verse 11, he says, "Grant me the joy of your presence and pleasures of living with you forever." In Psalm 23, verse 6, he says, "I will live in the house of the Lord forever." Psalm 37, 18, "Day by day the Lord takes care of the innocent. He will receive an inheritance that lasts forever." Psalm 41, verse 12, "You have brought me into your presence forever." You know when David wrote those, you know what he had on his mind? 2 Samuel 12, verse 23, listen to these words. David writing about his infant son who he longed to see once again. He says, "Can I bring him back again? No." He said, "I will go one day to him, but he cannot return to me." One of the encouragements for us is that this psalm that David writes, and in 2 Samuel that he talks about, that I'm going to go see my son one day. The understanding is that this infant, that David would be reconnected and he would be reunited with his son who passed away prematurely. And he writes about that then in all those psalms. God's plan and purpose for us and for our loved ones who have put their trust and faith in God is that we'll be reunited again one day forever in heaven together. And so as the pain of loss ebbs and flows in our hearts, that the grieving, well, you never get over the loss of a loved one, ever. But the understanding is this, that God can be our comfort, because we know that one day, we will have our faith become sight, and we'll be reunited once again with those that we love. For further encouragement and further study, look up Psalm 116, verses 12 to 19. Thanks so much for watching.